Spider-Man has one of the best rogues galleries ever. It's definitely between him and Batman anyway, in that all the villains kind of reflect a little part of what the main protagonist has. Batman villains are usually masterminds that indulge in personas, Spider-Man villains are usually spiteful nerds. Another thing that Spider-Man and Batman have in common is that they've got a heck ton of movies, and a heck ton of chances for those villains to be adapted in said movies. So I'm going to be counting down all 15 Spider-Man movie villains, from worst to best. Now, sorry Spider-Verse fans, this list does exclude that film, because Into the Spider-Verse is just a completely different thing altogether in my opinion, and I just wouldn't know where to rate the villains of Into the Spider-Verse among the other live-action counterparts. Much like how I feel about the film altogether, I just don't know where I would rank it. So these villains will be exclusively from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, Mark Webb's 2 Amazing Spider-Man movies, not that they're amazing, that's just the title of them. The irony. And John Watts' 2 Spider-Man home movies, I guess. Let's begin! So, in 15th place, at the very bottom of the pile, is the Green Goblin, as portrayed by Dane DeHaan from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 featured a number of different villains, and the film basically featured a number of different flavors of which those villains kind of represent. You've got Electro, who almost takes himself seriously, but doesn't quite. You've got Rhino, that doesn't take himself seriously at all. And then you've got Dane DeHaan's Green Goblin, which takes himself very, very seriously. And he's the most built-up villain in the Amazing Spider-Man film franchise. His whole story is that he's inheriting a disease, and he needs Spider-Man's blood in order to get cured of that, but Spider-Man says no, so he basically goes and gets some spider blood of his own, I guess. And it turns out that only one person can be Spider-Man, because apparently it's quicker to inject spiders with your own DNA than it is to kill them. And I could write a video essay on why that sucks. This villain here was just born out of plot hole, contrivance, and bad decisions. And the end result is an absolute mutation of the character, literally. This villain could rank bottom just simply for how his design looks. He's Beavis dressed as a half-finished Master Chief with meth mouth. Now, Dane DeHaan's a good actor, and he's good in the role of Harry Osborn, I will give him that. But as the Green Goblin, he just didn't sell me, and I think it's because there wasn't really much of a vision of what this character was. They kind of wanted it to be like a scenery-chewing villain, but at the same time, they wanted a sympathetic angle, and yet at the same time, they wanted him to be a complete mutation. At the same time, they wanted some kind of Jekyll and Hyde stuff going on. And then they reference Heath Ledger's Joker with Spider-Man being like, hey, let her go, and he just drops Gwen Stacy. Overall, this one, just pathetic. In 14th place, we have the Scorpion from Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, he hasn't exactly had a chance to shine. He's a creepy guy with a creepy performance with some scars and a scorpion tattoo on him, but if he's gonna truly be the Scorpion, then he's not the Scorpion yet. The actor is interesting enough for me to want to see him get into a Scorpion costume, I guess, but other than that, it's kind of just a name drop. But I mean, like, it's okay, it's kind of inoffensive. Just strange that they made such a point of his inclusion. In 13th place, we have Rhino. And just, what the hell? Where do I even start with this? When I first heard that Rhino was going to be more of a mech, I was fine with that, because, like, in the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, he's more of a mech, and I guess that's a better fit for this universe than it would be to have a guy running around in a rhinoceros onesie. And I don't even have an issue with his design. Like, I appreciate that he actually looks kind of... He has kind of more of a rhinoceros anatomy to him. I kind of like the fact that he's also not, like, ridiculously sized or anything. But then I guess we should start at Alexei Sitsevich, as portrayed by Paul Giamatti. Paul Giamatti is a fantastic actor, generally, but you wouldn't believe it going from this film. Because this performance just chews scenery on a whole new level. The dialogue is not something that any thought has been put into. His first sequence is he screams his name at the audience while driving a truck. Rhino might be supposed to be a bit of a big dum-dum, but, like, this is just on a whole new level. But then we have the fact that, like, Rhino's main ability is that he charges, like, you know, like a real rhinoceros, you know? So what do Rhino's abilities consist of in the actual film? Shooting guns and rockets. We see him kind of slowly crawl at Spider-Man while shooting rockets all over the place. I feel so sorry for anyone that came to watch this film for Rhino. In 12th place, we have Electro. So Jamie Foxx is another really good actor, but you'd have to take my word for that after watching The Amazing Spider-Man 2, because it feels like they were paying light tribute to two Batman film villains, and it's from two Batman films that many deem to be some of the worst in the franchise. When he's just Max Dillon, he reminds me a lot of the Riddler from Batman Forever. He's jittery, he's obsessive, and he's a suck-up. He's a suck-up to the main superhero. He fantasizes about him. But in the film, or at least the film's publicity, they tried to paint him as a sympathetic villain, taking cues from Alfred Molina's Dr. Octavius. But this is a far cry from that, folks. This is a grown man that has fantasies of Spider-Man arriving at his birthday party, that honestly believes that Spider-Man is his best friend because of one singular and completely contrived exchange. Come on, guys, we really need to aim higher than this. But when he actually becomes Electro, I actually had some fun with this character in this performance, because he's kinda like Diet Mr. Freeze from Batman and Robin. He's a guy that's painted blue and comes out with puns. The best thing is, though, they even got lazy when it came to the puns compared to Mr. Freeze in Batman and Robin, because many of his lines are kind of one-liners, but that just kind of feel like comic book fodder one-liners. There's a lot of cliche villain dialogue in there, but really very little of it is actually puns. And by the end, Electro becomes nothing but a lackey for Harry Osborn. Again, just, if you're gonna be a bad villain, at least just aim higher, at least be like Mr. Freeze tier, come on. In 11th place is Dr. Kafka. Is this guy a villain? Yeah, he kind of is. He does torturous experiments to Electro. And I think around that part of the movie we're still supposed to feel bad for him, even though he completely dies without a redemption. So yeah, Dr. Kafka is your trademark mad kooky scientist, but they take it to another level by having a pretend German accent. I think what I love so much about this is that so much of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 wants you to take it so seriously, and then they throw this at you. And every scene that Dr. Kafka's in is a blast. This is the reason why I actually think I like The Amazing Spider-Man 2 a little better than The Amazing Spider-Man 1, even though I'd say Amazing Spider-Man 1, is a more coherent film. Amazing Spider-Man 2 just has these moments where it just throws everything at the fan and just has a big lol. It's the parts where it kind of goes a bit Joel Schumacher Batman that I actually enjoy in this film. And if it just committed to this and were tonally consistent, it could have been a decent film. A stupid one, but if it was self-aware, then what's really to complain about? And this is where the joke's over. This is where it gets painful. This is where I kind of start to feel a bit sad, because in number 10 is the new Goblin from Spider-Man 3. The new Goblin was a slow burn. He was a very highly built-up villain. They laid down the groundwork for his character and his motivations meticulously over the course of 2 movies to pay it off in the third one, where Harry Osborn would finally get revenge on Peter Parker and follow in his father's footsteps to become his greatest nightmare. But that's just far from what this actually ended up being. What we got instead was a very brief bout with this new Goblin, fighting against Peter at a time when he wasn't ready and couldn't anticipate it. Okay, great. But then he gets knocked out, and then he gets amnesia, and he's benched for like the entire second act of the film. So we instead see him dancing and cooking eggs until he gets his memory back, and then he really just wants to get with Mary Jane more than anything else. Then he eats pie and disappears at an unrealistic timing. I'll admit I took a lot of satisfaction in his redemption, but even that was pretty dang contrived. And by the end, they just didn't earn his death. Like, yeah, I appreciate the poetry of him dying the same way his father did, but this time with Venom shoving it through him. It's a great moment for Venom too, but we established earlier in the film that there were so many ways that Harry could have gotten that glider back. Sorry, Sky Stick, without jumping into it. There was really no valid reason for Harry to die, which meant that the franchise kind of ended on a bit of a whimper. For Pete's sake, Harry. Pete. This whole third film was on your shoulders and you blew it. In 9th place, we have Venom. And I think people are often pretty quick to disregard the actual qualities of this version of Venom. Spider-Man fans have such a tendency to jump on their high horse and say, but the comics, but then disregard the fact that there's a lot of Spider-Man comics, and that things aren't really as consistent as we all think they are. I don't have the biggest attachment to Venom there is. Once in a blue moon, you get a very good portrayal of him, and that's about it. What I like about him is the fact that he's actually something of a doppelganger towards Spider-Man, and when you put the two together, they kinda look alike. They also share the same abilities, so it always makes for a thrilling action sequence. And I'll say this, what they did get right about Venom was that Eddie Brock was very much the juxtaposition of Peter Parker. Now, I know it hasn't always been this way in the comics. Eddie Brock is often portrayed as quite a noble guy, and a bodybuilder at that. But I really think this version of Venom fits well in this universe and makes for a really good villain. And you can argue about technicalities all you want, but a good villain is a good villain. Basically, we've seen Peter Parker spend 2 movies learning all about what it means to be responsible and mature, and the prices that he has to pay if he doesn't. With Eddie Brock, we're introduced to a guy that's a little bit similar to Peter in terms of his build, his appearance, his profession. But Eddie Brock just cheats his way through life, and when he gets caught, he's only sorry he got caught and refuses to take responsibility for it, instead wishing to spite the people that outed him. That's a really good foundation for a Venom origin story. When you put that alien symbiote on him and give him spider powers of his own, you should be in for a really interesting dynamic, and I think the thing that does let this down is what Venom did in the end, and all he did was took Spider-Man's girlfriend, basically, and then immediately asked for help in doing so. Venom's action sequence wasn't as kinetic and exciting as it could have been. There was a great deal of stopping and starting so that Venom could talk to Peter, and every time he talked, he peeled back that cool Venom face we all came to see. And considering that he's probably one of the most vocal Spider-Man villains, most of his entire battle consists of dialogue. So that's such a letdown because his design in this film was damn near perfect. I know some people wanted him to bulk up a little bit, but I really just loved the whole webbing on him, accentuating the similarities between him and Spider-Man. And that big toothy fangy mouth and that giant tongue, just pure Venom. It really was a letdown that he was just wasted like this in the end. In 8th place is the Lizard from The Amazing Spider-Man 1. The Lizard was quite an interesting character because Rhys Ifans' portrayal of Dr. Connors is kind of that quirky retro scientist, but in a very dignified way, but at the same time that's really all there is to say about him. He wants to grow back his arm, he wants to perform miracles, he doesn't want anyone to feel any kind of pain or loss anymore. And the special effects used to realize the Lizard are actually very strong. He looks very convincing in this film. We also get some sequences of Spider-Man in the sewers looking for the Lizard. It meant that we got something different out of The Amazing Spider-Man 1, at least when it kicked into gear. The unfortunate thing is they tried to get more philosophical with it than it really was. In the 3rd act, the Lizard unfurls a deadly plot to turn every New York citizen into a lizard, which is a really, really stupid use of the character, but then they take it to a new level by having him get all philosophical about the power that Peter feels and how, he wouldn't want to give it up. And he's just trying to win Peter over by kind of taunting him. He's one of those villains where execution is kind of everything, and they executed him well enough for him to not be absolutely laughable. However, he's really nothing more than just that. He's not laughable, he's just okay, and just really poorly used. In 7th place is Jackson Bryce, aka the Shocker version 1 from Spider-Man Homecoming, aka Montana, and let's just call him that because I cannot be bothered to specify his full name every time. Montana is established as kind of a blue-collar maverick, a guy that doesn't care about his job, he doesn't really care about anyone else, he just clocks in, he goes, he can't be bothered. When Adrian Toomes turns his business into a supervillain organization, we get to see that sort of maverick personality transfer over to his criminal career, and it has some pretty bad consequences for him, let's just say. But I thought he was a very entertaining character, and he was definitely kind of the more comic booky homage to the Shocker than the Herman Schultz one they went on to do later on in the film. He made for a fun sub-villain that was all he needed to be, he got just the right amount of screen time, he had just the right amount of presence, and he was just a good version of the Shocker. In 6th place is the Sandman, another one of those villains where execution is definitely everything. Now, it does say a lot about Spider-Man 3's narrative, that Sandman is the one character that doesn't really have anything to do with the overall plot at hand, being the symbiote and the Harry Osborn thing that's been built up over the movies. However, he ends up being the best thing in it. Now, I'll say, in terms of characterization, he's a crook that turned to crime to provide for his sick daughter. And it really does feel that cliche. Like, this whole sad backstory thing just feels like it's trying to recapture Dr. Octavius from Spider-Man 2, but it just goes that bit more glib. We never see this guy try and get a job. We never see him do anything else to attempt to provide for his sick daughter. And then they tie it into the origin in a way that's completely unnecessary by having him be the actual killer of Uncle Ben. But the whole tragic thing is that he didn't mean to. It was an accident. Sorry, Peter. I appreciate this sort of tying into the theme of forgiveness, at least. And I guess, like, in that regard, yeah, he does kind of play into the whole theme of the trilogy, but at the same time, he just kind of comes out of nowhere. And also, I was quite happy just letting the Uncle Ben's killer thing slide in Spider-Man 1. So what actually redeems this, then? Is the special effects, man. Those sand effects in 2007 still look good today. And Sandman has definitely some of the most creative action sequences in Spider-Man 3. So by no means is Sandman a home run, but he was certainly an entertaining villain. In 5th place, we have Herman Schultz, aka the Shocker, in Spider-Man Homecoming. Herman Schultz was the right-hand man to Adrian Toomes in Spider-Man Homecoming, and he pretty much aided in the whole Vulture crusade, which led to some very unique action sequences, and I really enjoyed seeing Shocker kind of be a guy that didn't really care to be a super criminal or anything. He's just kind of going with the flow, to sort of relishing in it a little bit towards the end. He just left an impression on me, and I'd be happy to see more of him. He didn't overstep his line of trying to be a bigger villain or anything like that. He was just hit the target. In 4th place, we have the Vulture. I wasn't really sure how to feel about Vulture being the main villain of Spider-Man's first outing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. After all, we'd seen him fight the Falcon before. I mean, how different could it be? But to be fair, Spider-Man Homecoming was very, very fresh. That's one thing it certainly had going for it. And the Vulture was a very fresh villain within that. And he really kind of set the tone for what MCU Spidey's villains were capable of. Spider-Man Homecoming explored the friendly neighborhoods of the Avengers movies. It explored the slice-of-life effects that the Avengers' actions have on ordinary people. And Adrian Toomes was a part of that. He's a guy that's trying to feed his family, and he's trying to clean up after the mess of the Avengers, but then, here comes Tony Stark's own cleanup organization here to steal all the jobs. All so that they can just claim responsibility, but what does any of that mean when there are families to feed? And that's what's interesting about the Vulture, is he's actually kind of right. So he takes matters into his own hands to feed his family and starts selling items that he finds in the post-Avengers battle cleanups, and starts stealing them too. This made for an extremely interesting rendition of the Vulture, really well played by Michael Keaton. But I think what really sold this so well was that he's actually a really good father to Liz Allen, well, apart from trying to kill her kind of prom date, I guess. That's gonna make her miserable, dude. She's gonna find out. But Vulture was truly threatening, but at the same time, you could kind of get behind what he was trying to go for. And he kind of marked kind of the beginning of a new era of MCU villains, where they actually started finally getting them right, and we realized that ego wasn't just a fluke. In 3rd place, we have Doc Ock from Spider-Man 2. Doc Ock is a superb sympathetic villain. Once again, he's the hero of his own story. He wants free energy for all of New York City. And when it all goes wrong, he's extra determined to make it go right the next time, and he doesn't care what hangs in the balance. Nothing will stand in his way. What drives him over the edge is the inhibitor chip in the back of his tentacles breaks, and now the tentacles have a little bit of a control over him. It's that kind of narrative device that should probably stay in the past. But Alfred Molina's Doc Ock knew just how to be intimidating, when to be a little bit goofy, and how to really still be sympathetic, and had a philosophy that Spider-Man could understand. But Spider-Man couldn't get too caught up in the romanticism of beneficial science. He had to save the day. It made for a very interesting conflict, and I would say that this is probably the definitive version of Dr. Octopus, alongside the Spider-Man PS4 version, which took a lot of cues from this, but did it in a whole new way. And in 2nd place, we have the Green Goblin as portrayed by Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin is by no means the most complex villain on this list, but he's certainly one of the most entertaining villains in comic book movie history, thanks to Willem Dafoe's absolutely superb performance and some excellent dialogue and directing. He's truly the most dangerous villain that Spider-Man faced in the Sam Raimi trilogy. He starts off as more of a father to Peter Parker than his own son because he just has more in common with Peter Parker, which kinda sets up a very unfortunate circumstance for Harry Osborn, and he proves very disrespectful towards Harry and Mary Jane. He kinda becomes a slave to his own secondary personality, a bit of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing, but done right, unlike the number 15th spot on this list. And when Norman Osborn gets into that green and purple armor, he truly is, and yes, it is green and purple, it's a chameleon paint that only shows up in the certain lights, so you might see some purple shades on that costume in some lights. He truly jumps into into the scenery-chewing performance that we know we want to have from the Green Goblin, and there's no better man for this than Willem Dafoe. And as well as that, he's so violent and sadistic. He truly is worthy of a spot among the classic greats. But for me, the number one villain in Spider-Man film history is the same as my number one villain in Spider-Man comics history, and call me biased, maybe I am, but who isn't? It's Mysterio from Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, the whole thing of the twist villain, like the wolf in sheep's clothing thing, has kind of been done to death by Disney and Pixar. But in this case, they still found a way to surprise me with it. Yes, I knew that Mysterio would be a villain all along because I'm familiar with the comics. Part of me was like, is the MCU going to change it a little bit, you know? Maybe they're going to make some tweaks, but I was not, like, surprised he was a villain. I was surprised by how much had gone into him becoming a villain, and what his plan actually was, and the dire consequences of that. And it keeps true with the whole after effects of the Avengers thing that Spider-Man Homecoming went with Adrian Toomes. Here he worked for Stark Industries, and he designed the illusion tech that Tony Stark used at the beginning of Captain America Civil War. Which is a great appropriation. And basically he rallied together a bunch of Stark Industries employees to kind of create a superhero of their own to generate fake news and control the truth. And Mysterio is one vicious guy. As I said earlier, Spider-Man villains are generally spiteful nerds, and that essence hasn't always been captured. But with Mysterio, it's captured more than ever. And in his actual villain performance, he does reach some almost Defoe levels of maniacal. He's just so twisted and manipulative. And as well as that, he is extremely accurate to Mysterio in the classic Spider-Man comic books. The only difference being that his background is in Stark Industries as opposed to in the film industry. He's still a very bitter man that wants to manipulate the truth into his own favor, and doesn't care who he has to destroy to get that. And the fact is, Mysterio is a very relevant villain for that. And then just on top of that, there's just how his design looked. I would have been fine if they'd just used the fishbowl and done nothing else. But like, he is on point classic Mysterio. Go ahead, call me a fanboy, whatever. I'll call you a schmuck. Wait, hang on, oh, what's this? Woohoo! Okay, hate to flex on you guys, but that is incredible. You guys are truly the best. Now I've got to work on something special for you guys. Anyway, what do you guys think? Comment below and discuss, and as always, if you've enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, don't forget to hit below to subscribe if you haven't already, hit the like button, and in the description below are links to the Patreon and my Discord server. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I've been Channel Pup, and I will think of a better catchphrase next time. 10,000 subscribers. You guys.